So it's funny you bring up Beyond Meat. So I'm vegan, and I bought Beyond Meat because I like it.
Yeah.
And so it's doing well for me.
Right.
But I also have a Peloton bike, and they just became at like 2 days. Like, how do you know when to keep riding with it or cut your losses?
So I wasn't following the Peloton IPO, but typically the way IPOs, the way they
That's
the way
because
they
of who
work,
owns Peloton.
the
The owner of Peloton, if I remember correctly, I think the issue with them was that he has made some slightly like not positive statements in the public that were like slightly racist, a little wrong. No. But that's why their stock apparently went down. At the end of the day, it was bad press. And so no one wanted to be a part of them because it was bad press. Now, it's still a popular thing. My thing is, who makes their bikes? Who makes the parts for the bikes?
And so with Peloton, the way IPOs typically work is and this is again typically, this is probably, I don't know, at least over 50%, I would say, of IPOs in the last decade or so. And you can fact check me on this, I'm not sure the exact number, but typically there is a huge rise, right? It's like Peloton, I don't know what happened, but I'm assuming that it probably, once the IPO hit, say it was $20 a share, probably rose to $30 a share, something like that. And then everybody takes their money out, and cool, I just made, think about it, if you just bought something for $20 and you made a 50% return in like 2 hours, you're good. Imagine you put like, $1 million on that bet. You just made $500,000 in 2 hours. Okay, I'm straight, I got my money, and then that's kind of like a false positive almost, right? And then everybody starts pulling out, and then it starts to normalize a little. Maybe it just dips down below 20, and then a couple weeks it go up. And so then it starts to normalize, then you start figuring, okay, how well is this company doing? And that's kind of the difference between IPOs. So if you're gonna bet on an IPO, do one or two things. Number one, you either are going to bet on the initial pop and get out after you make 10, 20%, right? Don't be greedy.
I missed that.
Yeah, you missed that. So that would be a trade. And so number two, you invest. So two is like invest. So you invest for the long run because these racist statements, that if it's so egregious, I'm sure from public pressure the board will fire that CEO or whomever made those comments or
same thing. It's like,
and that's typically over the long run, or 5 years from now, you may not even remember it. So
a good example would be Papa John's. So the owner or the CEO of Papa John's had made some racist statements. So they didn't technically fired him, but they removed him from a position of authority. And then they started rebranding. So now who's the face on all the commercials? Shaq. Everybody loves Shaq. Right. And he's like, I've been eating Papa John's since I was 17. And it's just like, and then Shaq's hugging all the common folk. And I'm just like, okay, all right. But that's what they'll do to rebrand. So, right, and they didn't because they figured, I think certain companies will, and please correct me if I'm wrong in this statement, certain companies feel like I can take the hit and they don't care. Right. Tesla's not doing anything with Elon Musk. And Chick-fil-A doesn't care either.
So it depends on shareholder pressure because once the stock starts dropping, again, and this is a lesson for all of us as minorities in this room, money talks. The power is in the dollar. So imagine if Tesla says something about women, and this is really the thing about the gay community, right? Anybody say anything, remotely anti-gay, it's like, oh my God, dump all the stock, and every stock is just like, just goes down by 10-20%. That's because the people are actually bonding together and they're collectively acting, right? And so if all women said, F Tesla, no one buys a Tesla anymore, everyone dumps their stocks, I guarantee you Elon would be in a hot seat and probably, the board will have some questions.
He'd start taking his meds. Right. It'd be a whole different scenario.
So it all depends on, how we all band together. I'm not sure.
He's I would say he's eccentric is probably the best way to put it.
Right. So to summarize all this, the pressure you face as a company or CEO from your shareholders, which is like all of us, right? Which is our pensions, which is our individual bank account, our individual brokerage accounts. That pressure, if everyone starts to sell, then they get the fire starts to heat up, and then they have to act. And then whether it's a PR strategy, a pivot from your typical what do they do with Adam Newman for WeWork, right? I don't know if you guys heard about that. WeWork, they actually delayed their IPO, and I think they're asking Adam they're trying to ask him to step down. So the whole like thing, but it's the pressure of the public that is really leading that, right? And the public being again individual brokerage accounts and larger institutions. And all this money, I'm not sure if you all know this, but most of these institutions, these huge hedge funds I was talking about earlier, a lot of the investment banks and the money, the billions of dollars that are moving around, that's our pension money. A lot of it is pension, so a lot of it's like Ford pension, the Illinois State teachers pension, right? The police pension. So that all that money's moving around is technically
Remember when Enron happened and that whole scandal? The people that really suffered were people that were from major universities, because major universities invested their clients' pensions and their employees' pensions in Enron. So, prime example, my father was an employee at Howard University for 20-something odd years. No one knew that. I always rep a little bit. But that being said, most of the employees didn't know that all of their pensions were in Enron. So on average, most of those employees lost anywhere from as little as $200,000 to sometimes as much as almost $500,000. People went broke that were employed because they had no retirement.
Right. So baseline expectations. So what would you consider an average rate of return versus a good rate of return? And
for the stock market?
If you're investing in mutual.
So historically, the stock market yields over the long run, again, 10 to 12% historically. Now, I would say a really good return would be 7.5%, 8%. That's like a solid, strong, decent return. And you get that right now with a portfolio mix of about 80 to 90% in stocks. That's not the riskiest. That's pretty I actually just had this conversation with a friend of mine at a large bank, a client. We were having this conversation literally for his money. We're trying to target a 7.5% return, which is not crazy in this environment. The problem is that because interest rates are so low, you kind of have to have more of your exposure into stocks, and stocks can be a bit tumultuous. So 7.5% is a good one. You always want to go above 2% because 2% is inflation.
Inflation.
On average, in the long run, 2% is inflation. So if you want to target 7.5%, 8%, I think that's pretty steady. And I know there's a book, the Go on Fishing Portfolio. They talk about targeting 11%, which is doable, right? I think it's very doable to get 11%, but again,
it's a challenge.
It's a challenge, and it's a risk-reward trade-off. So it's like what is your risk tolerance? Obviously, the closer you are to retirement, your risk tolerance goes way down, right? Because you don't want to be in a situation where all your money is in the stock market, and we're in a recession, and now you're 62, and you got to go work at Walmart for 8 years, and that's literally what happened in 2008. And that's why people couldn't retire. Now, those same people, if they're still around, they stayed in and didn't sell. Their stock's probably doubled by now, and that's kind of question over here.
So my question was about if collectively groups of people got together, and let's just say 10,000 people got together and invested in Chick-fil-A.
Yep.
And pulled the money together, invested in that stock, and just decided that. And then the CEO comes out and does some foolishness like he did. Just saying. And do you think that collective group, if we all decided as a group to say, let's just take our money out of it, or let's just sell all that, do you think that that's something that a corporation would take notice of? And
it depends on how many shares that group of people owns.
If it's a large enough, if they own a large enough percentage to actually, have a squeak the wheel, right? Then 100% the CEO will probably apologize, or that's why you hear people coming in, on record apologizing or get reprimanded by the board or whatever. If enough people are selling off, then that affects the price of the stock.
Are
And
there some black hedge funds?
There are a few black hedge funds. There's actually one in Chicago. So the thing about hedge funds is that it's really hard to get exposure if you're not a qualified investor, and that's I talked about this in the earlier one of the earlier
probably at first or second.
The difference between a financial advisor and a wealth manager, right? And a wealth manager typically you can get exposure to these alternative investments, which are the hedge funds, the private equity funds, and because the fees are pretty high, and they usually require a high minimum investment to get into it, right? So imagine, you're Goldman Sachs, you have 1,000 clients, and you can pull their money together and give someone $10 million, to manage that money in their hedge fund. And to your original question, yes, there are black hedge funds. No, there aren't a lot. There's one in Chicago. It's actually run by a fairly young guy. He's a black dude. I can't remember his name right now, but he's in his I don't think so, actually.
I'm trying to get Chose over here.
Intro.
I see you trying to get Chose over here. I see you.
I'm just trying to learn.
Teach me your ways.
So with everything being said, as far as like you all saying you're investing, I guess my problem here is I don't know, because I've been looking into it. Where to buy a stock from?
Good question.
Where do you buy stocks?
Yes, so there are several platforms you can use online. Robinhood.
That are free.
Yeah, Robinhood is what I use because Robinhood is free. I can send you a link after this.
You can literally download it on your phone.
Yeah, Robinhood, and it gives you free trades. TD Ameritrade, I think like $9 a trade. TD Ameritrade, they had friends that were part of that deal on the legal side.
Oh.
And they did this. TD Ameritrade bought Scottrade, and it was a mess. Well, it wasn't a mess. It was a mess for him. He hated his life for 6 months, but
Understandable.
I'm
trying to think how much Schwab is a trade. I feel like Schwab doesn't.
More, isn't it? They charge.
I feel like it's $9.
E-Trade too.
Yeah.
Schwab maybe $9.
Yeah, 9 or 12. But
Robinhood, if you're
Robinhood,
doing Robinhood's like, unless you're moving tens of thousands of dollars every month or something like, you're fine.
get it.
Besides Robinhood, what other apps do you all recommend?
E-Trade, TD Ameritrade,
Schwab.
Those are all apps.
Which one?
Yeah, they're apps and companies.
SCHWAB.
Yeah. And so I think today is we're going to put together a newsletter if there's interest for that, and it's going to be a monthly newsletter or something like that. And it's going to have like a list of resources and some news, and then like hot stocks. Not for me, because I'm not going to I'm not a financial analyst, but there are financial analysts who do this for a living and sift through the BS, and I can present that to you guys. Obviously, with huge disclaimers, I'm not recommending you buy anything.
Yeah.
I read 7 publications every morning.
Okay, no, I'm not reading 7 every morning. Let's be clear. I read maybe about 2, maybe 3.
And so that gives me a holistic
7.
view of the global economy, and that gives me I can kind of know where things are, and I can give articles and curate stuff
Attorney,
for you.
physician. I got it. Like, there's a difference. But I'll look at a new article that's come out about this. There was some company that I found that is instrumental in kidney transplants. And I was like, oh, and like everybody utilizes them. I was like, and you're only $7 a share? Bet. So there'll be little things that I'll look up and I'll say, oh, okay, this makes sense based off of what people are looking at. For me, when cannabis stocks first became kind of the new hot thing, I was looking at growers and I was looking at resources that they utilize. I did look at some fertilizers, and then I also looked at a company that just put out, because I actually used it in a patient, a new drug that they basically use, that a cannabis company created, that is a new drug for a specific type of epilepsy, and it's for refractory seizures. And it's the only drug in the market for those people who have that syndrome that creates these refractory seizures. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna buy you.
That's a good
Yeah.
to buy.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so thing you want to look out for is, or the thing you want to pay attention to is localized monopolies, or like small monopolies, right? Another way to say that is companies that have big moats, right? So like, how safe are they? So for example, this drug manufacturer, I'm sure it's going to take someone else, a couple years of R&D. So you may have a couple years where they are the only manufacturer that makes this drug. The barrier to entry. How high is that barrier to entry from a competitive standpoint? And those are one of the things you want to look out. Like if someone's buying, if someone's making glasses, like glasses for wine, and they have some kind of special type of glass, but that special type of glass can be replicated. The company is going to start doing that, and therefore it's going to eat their market share. Which is why I'm not a big fan of Beyond Meat, because I don't think there's a ton of different ways that people can But if you have some kind of proprietary glass that you own a patent for, or that no one can no one can make this glass the way I can make it, and now this glass is being used in every restaurant in America, and no one's going to be able to catch up to that for 5 years, that's something you want to look into, you want to buy, if they're public. So things like, so you want to look at like how high the barrier to entry really is for competitors. And so monopolies are good, and that's the case. And when you're investing, they're not good for the economy overall, but like if you're looking to invest, you want to invest in like a monopoly type of company, which is like like Netflix was at one point.
Right.
They were the only place you can go online to get like quality content streamed for low price. That's like yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
Look for secret sauce.
That is it.
It's called their competitive advantage, or comparative advantage, just like the economic term.
Okay, so this is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So how do you live off of this after you retire? Like you
Yes,
just slowly just start liquidating all your assets?
Yeah, no. So good question. So it depends. So there's several answers to that question. I'll start with three. So number one, you can live off of interest income from your fixed income investments, right? So from your dividends, from your bonds you buy.
Bonds, yeah.
Let's say you buy.
We're going to get into that.
Yeah. So like you buy corporate bonds, then you can buy like government bonds, or you can buy municipal bonds,
junk bonds.
Buy junk bonds, all different kind of bonds, and they typically give you some kind of yield, right? And so let's say the yield, I don't know, you're making kind of $3 or 3% yield, and that will give you money to retire where you don't have to touch your principal. All right? But then you may need like $10, $15, $20, $30 million for that to get, depends how much your cost of living is, right? How much you spend every single year. That's one way, right, off of your fixed income. Another way, as I mentioned before, your dividends, right? If you're buying stocks and they pay dividends, that's also income coming in. So you can get that $50,000 every single quarter. Right. And then the third way would be, which I don't recommend, is liquidating assets slowly, which is that eats into your principal. And so if you start eating into your principal, then that means you're not getting, you can't get as high of a return, because you can get a higher return, not percentage-wise, but from a real basis, on $10 million versus $5 million. Right. So to answer your question less succinctly, it's going to be a combination of dividends and fixed income, and that's how you're going. And it depends on how much you're living. So if your cost of living is $200,000 each year, right? So if it's $100,000 each year, right?
I was like, oh, I wish.
So you need to figure out, okay, how much money do I need to save up today that will give me a return that's safe, that will yield me $100,000 every single year? And once you hit that number, you can retire.
But we're talking about what the dividends is going to be.
Well, dividends in year, so it's going to. So typically, like realistically, if you want a really safe investment in this environment, 3 to 4% is going to be like a return you can get. Like with municipal bonds, it's tax free. You can get like maybe 2-3%, and then fixed income or junk bonds may give you 7 or 8%, and then
so
corporate bonds.
These, like
ETFs, because those are stocks. Because that accumulates your principal. Because with bonds, your principal doesn't necessarily accumulate as much, but you get a return. So they're like more steady. So a stock will increase a lot faster than bonds will.
So it balances out your risk, because the bonds will always be steady. And we'll talk about bonds next, because we didn't talk about that yet. The bonds will always be steady, whereas your individual stocks and your ETFs will always fluctuate, because that's what the market does. So by having both, it balances out your risk, so you don't, when there's a loss, you don't necessarily feel the loss as much.
Right. So for example,
Yes,
Yeah.
we're talking about retirement. Yes.
Yes.
That's going to be a whole discussion in and of itself.
Stocks typically they're a little bit riskier because they're a little more they're more volatile. So you can lose principal in a stock very easily. Whereas, again, this is generalizations, right? All things being equal, bonds are a lot more stable, and so you want
Yeah.
What do you mean by long?
In terms of their maturity.
Right. so there are different maturity dates for bonds, right? So you can have like I'll give you an example. In the 1980s,
Maybe we should say what a bond is.
Oh, that's a good point.
Back up,
Does
backtrack,
Does everyone know what a bond is? Does anyone want to volunteer what they think a bond is? Who wants to?
It's okay. Are y'all Googling bond and what bond is? I feel like y'all are looking at that's cheating.
Right?
That's cheating.
You remember when your grandparents used to give you bonds or
Savings
savings bonds? Those are bonds.
That is not the definition.
That's what you was giving me? No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So things they invested in to get returned instantly. So you finally.
Long term.
Yeah.
So they have
I
a
was doing it
maturity.
too quick, huh?
maturity.
Cash though.
They have a maturity date, so that you get the full return of full vested interest off of whatever the value of that bond is. So if you bought it for what was it the E bonds or something like that?
That's one
You bought
example.
$100 bond for $10. When it matured, it was worth $100. But if you cashed it next week after you got it, you only got $10.02 effectively. So you had to wait until that bond matured, and each bond has a maturity date. So you got 10-year bonds, 15 years,
30 years.
Yeah.
That's why grandparents give it to you when you were a child, because they know you can't use it yet.
Bonds versus stocks. This is like finance 101. So like I don't remember anything. So does a bond does anything depreciate? You know, like stocks, everything fluctuates.
All right.
right?
So I'll break down. So a bond is an IOU, right? So that means if I say, all right, Paris, I'm going to give you $100 today, right? And I want you to give me that same $100 back in 20 years, but every year you got to pay me $5. Right? So that means every year, so that $100 is yours, you pay me $5 every single year for 30 years, and then at the end of the 30 years, I get my $100 back. And there's a whole complicated math equation called the Black-Scholes model that actually, the whole complicated equation that prices bonds, and that's a really like an in-depth conversation that we won't have, but suffice it to say, you know, it's called a coupon, right? The coupon would be 5%, right? Because I loaned you $100, and I said you pay me 5% back, right? Every year for 30 years, right? So that 5% is $5 of $100, right? So if you do 5 times 30 was at $150, right? So very back of the envelope math, right? So you say, okay, in 30 years I would have earned $150 from you, right? And I get my $100 back, right? So if there was no time value of money, it would be worth $250. But because money is worth more today than it is in 30 years, you have to discount that back to the present day.
Because of inflation.
Okay.
I got you.
Inflation and opportunity costs, right? So now that pure $250 isn't $250. It may be something closer to like, 120, 150. I'm not sure the number, but you can actually calculate that, and that's how you price a bond. So that's why if we had this agreement, this IOU, right? And if I said, let's just say it was worth $150, right? As soon as I loan you that $100, assuming you have good credit and you're going to be paying me back, that bond's now worth $150 to the market. I can go to Shawnee and say, all right, Shawnee, I can take this off my plate. You give me $120 for this. It's worth $150, and here you go. And she said, cool, I'll take that. I got my $20. I'm cool. I'm out here, right? I made $20 like in one day. Now Shawnee can go say, okay, well, you can go somewhere else. So I have a piece of paper that's worth $150, and I paid $120 for it. I'm gonna sell it to DZ for $130.
Right.
So DZ buys it, and then now Shawty made her $10, and and she's good. She made a profit, and you just kind of keep doing that, and that's how bonds trade. And now let's just say your credit gets like bad, right? Let's just say like, you're like, I can't make that payment. Now that 150s, it dropped, and so DZ may be holding a bad, a bad IOU. Or let's just say, so there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but a bond is essentially an IOU for.
So if bonds are like money accumulating on top of money on top of money on top of money, then would you say that bonds are one of the reasons for inflation?
And that's the question.
I don't know if it would say it's the reason.
No, so
I think they're an example of it.
So
I think they're an example of inflation, but not necessarily the cause of it. But that's a good thought.
So okay,
I like that.
Money, they're kind of like creating more money from thin air.
So you're not wrong. So this is a deeper question, and I'll come back in a minute. But I want to answer your question. It's a very good question, right? So inflation occurs when money is injected into the economy, right? So when the Federal Reserve prints money, it gets injected into the economy, meaning there's a larger money supply. Therefore, everyone's dollar is not worth a dollar anymore because it's a larger pool of money, right? And to your point, the way that banks make money is they typically loan out money, right? So they'll loan you money, right? And which is like an IOU.
You have to have a reserve to loan you money.
Right, which is an IOU, right? And then it used to be the reserve was, a couple percentages, and now it's increased. But because
It used
of
to
that,
be the reserve was gold, but
right? And
we
because
don't do that
because of the money, the reserves have actually increased. I can see you an article if you're really interested. I read it. It's about this really good economist, and he explains this very well. Because the reserves have actually increased over since the financial crisis. That's why we're not seeing inflation. And the Federal Reserve has been injecting capital. And even now, they're contemplating more and more capital injection. It's called quantitative easing. We're not seeing inflation as we would see pre-2008 because the reserves are so high. So we have a lot of money sitting on the sideline that can't be injected into the actual economy. Because that was one of my questions. I was sitting there. This was even in law school. I was in class like, why? If we have all this quantitative easing, if all this money is being injected into the economy, why aren't we seeing inflation? This is crazy. And then this economist, I read an article, and he hits it on the head. Because we have so much money on the sideline, reserves are actually, because reserves are
we look better than what we really are.
Are we going into the recession right now?
Not yet.
No one knows. And no one knows. Everyone's been saying it for 2 years. Like 2 years ago, it's 2 years. And so it just really depends because we had Trump's monetary policy has really pushed back the timeline for a recession, just because he's decreased the jobless rate. Right. I guess increase the jobless rate.
Yeah.
Increase the jobless rate. Increase the jobless rate. He's cut taxes, which allow for foreign corporations to actually repatriate capital and reinvest into the economy. So we're seeing the effects of that, which keeps money going. Consumer sentiment's positive. Consumer spending is good. Debt's going higher. So like all the signs, if you close your eyes and if we weren't, if we weren't like 10 years into a boom, you would, the economy's doing well. But because we are so far into a boom and typically booms only last about 10 years, everyone's like, recession's on the way. But is it really? No one knows. I don't know. I would say we're closer to a recession than not. But no one really knows about that. If that answers your question about inflation,
I think I was genuinely confused because I was curious.
It's a good question. It is not an easy question. And inflation is one of those elusive topics that people, everyone says they know about. Like even economists say, we know exactly what's happening, but no one really knows. We think we know. We have some. We have some methods that can increase or try to increase inflation, but there's so many variables going on. It's impossible to predict the future like that. Yeah.
But back to bonds. So the one thing I will say about bonds is based off of, I think, your example that you gave earlier, it shows how they are essentially the steady portion of your portfolio. They're not gonna do too great. They're not ever gonna do too bad. Yeah. Whereas if you look at a stock, you could invest in Google one day, they get investigated and there's an antitrust lawsuit and their stock goes down by 50%. And then everyone's sad because they put all this money in Google. You're not going to deal with those fluctuations like that in a bond.
Because a bond is priced based on the issuer's ability to repay. Google's not, Google's going to be, they're going to repay, right? They have capital, they're not going to not repay, right? So that's the reason why it's a little less volatile. It's not based on how well you're doing in day-to-day operations, it's based on your ability to pay.
But that's why you need both in your portfolio.
To balance it.
Because you need that balance. Because if not, then you just all risk, you're all like throwing your cash in the wind like.
I've always thought about I'm not a very good investor and I'm trying to get better at it, but I thought about investing in stocks or commodities or startup companies. Or, it's like you don't really know
MLPs, REITs, CTOs.
You are moving ahead of the class, sir.
You're talking about balancing it out. So I feel like that really helps. If you need that balance.
You need balance, right?
Yes.
It's going to protect you. It's called protecting your downside, right? Because you won't get as high as highs, but you're not going to get as low as lows. And so you want to get that sweet spot where you're getting a nice return. I mean, all things equal.
We'll go. Yes.
So it's a whole thing called a capital allocation strategy, right? Where you have like a percentage in stocks, a percentage in bonds, a percentage in alternatives, and a percentage in cash, right? And it's that would be your overall if you think of it like a pie chart, right? You have like different percentages,
right?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, your risk tolerance and based on.
Yes.
I usually have whiteboards. I'm a big whiteboard person, so I have.
Yes, he is. God help us.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we're talking about retirement, but what about us entrepreneurs? How should we go into what should our mindset be in our 30 years? Should we have a financial advisor? Should we be working with our business strategist? How do we get these things in place? Because it's a lot of things going on, so it's we could do it on our hand, but who should be our trusted source of assistance? You guys?
So that's what we I've been talking a lot with my friends in New York and a bunch of friends, and the new craze is because there are so many sources of information out there right now. Because I didn't realize it. So I'm like, wow. Because Shawnee was like, people want to know. Why don't you just Google this? What y'all?
Because he reads 7 articles every morning. Sometimes DK forgets what us normal people do.
And so I realized and talked to a lot of my friends in New York. There's something called content curators. That's going on right now in the tech community, and because the regular community is always a couple years behind the tech community, it's going to start trickling into our lives. And that means there's so much information out there, so many data points, so many people being experts. You don't know who to trust, right? But you can see me, you can call me, you can email me, right? You know that, okay, DK's reputation is on the line with this one. So you can at least trust something about what I'm saying, right? So that's what we talk about doing this newsletter, where I can actually curate some content for you all and say, okay, these are trusted articles that I know that my friends on Wall Street are doing this trading send me, and I can send it to you guys. I can break it down a little bit, and that's so that would be an example.
That's an example.
So you want to. And maybe it's not me, maybe it's someone else or whomever.
But you mentioned.
Oh no, I don't know. But I have some friends.
But you also mentioned financial advisors, and so we talked about that. I think our second meeting, the difference between a financial advisor and a wealth manager. So a financial advisor makes their money on the number of clients that they get. So they care about mass. So it's not to say that they don't care about your investments, but they may not be as invested in your investments as you are.
Right, versus a wealth manager.
Versus a
So what's the difference
So what's the difference between a financial advisor and a financial